Hey, it's Jordan with Status Coup. A year and a few months before the general election, and the desperate bosses, the real presidents of America, i.e., the United Corporations of America behind me, the donors, are looking for alternatives to both Joe Biden and Donald Trump. And the names are pretty interesting. Let's take a look. This is from Politico. A four-way race. The 2024 presidential contest is anything but settled. Okay. But Politico is now revealing that there is a, quote, moderate Democrat that's considering jumping in to primary President Biden. Yet even that may no longer be a sure thing. U.S. Representative Dean Phillips, a Minnesota moderate, has been receiving inquiries about his willingness to challenge Biden and is going to New York City next week to meet with Democratic donors about such a race, I'm told. Ooh, a Minnesota moderate. We'll get into the whole moderate thing. Going to hobnob with the donors for a possible run against Biden. Phillips, who's in his third term representing suburban Minneapolis, has drawn attention from contributors by both denouncing the no labels attempt to field a third-party ticket and calling for a contested Democratic primary next year. A former executive, he's also the sort of pro-business social moderate with private sector experience who corporate leaders usually pine for in a presidential candidate. If you don't know Phillips, he was born into, or his stepfather or step-grandfather had a very, very successful alcohol company, and then he had a gelato company. But what's interesting is Phillips, like many other moderate Democrats, has fancied himself above the corruption of modern politics, has railed against the corruption of modern politics. Let's take a look at a very, very hip TikTok ad he did in 2022, just before the midterm. Since it was a short, hip TikTok ad, what the ad actually says, and let me show you it here again, what the ad actually says: why do we tolerate legalized corruption? Candidates shouldn't be able to pay for high-profile endorsements, period. And what he was talking about was a news story that came out about candidates in a seemingly quid pro quo giving money to or donating to consultants, other high poobahs in the Democratic Party, and then seemingly in return getting their endorsement. This from Axios. How much 2022 candidates are paying after endorsements. Some big name 2022 candidates are cutting checks to high profile backers who endorse their campaigns, records show. Why it matters: key endorsements are a known boon to campaign battling for support, especially among ideological committed primary voters. The payments raise the specter of a quid pro quo. In some cases, campaigns are touting those endorsements in press releases and social media posts long before campaign finance records reveal consultant gigs and speaking fees. How it works: newly released records show the Senate campaigns of Arizona Republican Jim Lamont cut a $20,000 check in October to a firm run by Matt Schlapp, chairman of the American Conservative Union. The payment was itemized as, quote, communications consulting. 2 weeks later, Schlapp publicly endorsed Lamont. So, cool TikTok ad. Seems like Congressman Dean Phillips, the Minnesota moderate, is against corruption, legalized corruption, is against quid pro quo in politics. Yet, what's he doing now? Apparently, just with a little interest gone his way, what's he going to do? He's headed to New York City. Quote, he's been receiving inquiries about his willingness to challenge Biden and is going to New York City next week to meet with Democratic donors about such a race. And I could assure you, the donors he's meeting with, not blue-collar workers, not the workers inside Amazon passing out from 100-degree sweat in the warehouse, probably not workers on the buses, the subways, construction workers. Strong suspicion he's meeting with private equity, financial lawyers, big real estate, and the rest of the usual suspects, part of the United Corporations of America, right behind me. So Phillips, who, again, it's just being kind of rumored, might be running or challenge Biden in a primary. He actually had some words about Biden. This was from a little bit earlier this year. Quote, nobody wants to be the one to do something that would undermine the chances of a Democratic victory in 2024, Congressman Dean Phillips explained to me. Yet in quiet rooms, the conversation is just the opposite. We could be at higher risk if this path is cleared. Phillips would know from those quiet rooms. The third-term Democrat from suburban Minneapolis, a gelato company executive before running for Congress, was one of the few lawmakers last year to say his party should turn to a new generation in the next presidential race. And since the Democrats' unexpectedly strong midterm performance, scarcely few have followed suit, while every potential Biden successor has fallen in line behind his yet-to-be-announced candidacy. Meanwhile, the private conversations about the wisdom of nominating an octogenarian and despair over who could take Biden's place have hardly subsided. Quote, it's fear, plain and simple, Phillips explained, of both the lack of Democratic officials calling for a new nominee and reluctance of other candidates to step forward. Quote, people are focused on self-preservation and their aspirations. So, moderate Dean Phillips, who clearly is not above legalized bribery because he's going to hobnob with a who's who of donors in New York for a potential, keyword potential, primary challenge against Joe Biden. Where is he on actual policy? Well, he is a member of the Problem Solvers Caucus, which is a caucus that only seems intent on solving problems for wealthy Wall Street and real estate and fossil fucker donors. Josh Geitheimer, the New Jersey congressman, infamous for pushing tax cuts for the wealthy, among other not progressive corporate ghoul type policies, is, I believe, the chair of the Problem Solvers Caucus. Let's take a look at where Dean Phillips stands on Medicare for All. This was from an article in 2019 about centrist Democrats' worry over the push for Medicare for All. Meanwhile, another centrist freshman, Congressman Dean Phillips, said he's participated in behind-the-scenes talks on drug pricing among members of the bipartisan Problem Solvers Caucus led by Josh Gottheimer and Tom Reed. Quote, my preference is a simple one, which is to work with our Republican friends across the aisle to identify shared desired outcomes and then work our way backwards. Phillips, who defeated GOP Congressman Eric Paulson last fall, said in an interview, I'm disappointed that we have a system here that doesn't promote more of that kind of collaboration. We focus on tactics. Therefore, we never reach the outcome that we all want. Yes, the problem is just we're not working well enough with our friends on the Republican side. We just need to change tactics. Asked if he'll co-sponsor Jayapal's Medicare for All legislation, Phillips replied, quote, I respect it. Our party is a big tent. Anybody who throws out ideas, I have respect for. This word salad of hot air sounds very similar to Debbie Wasserman Schultz and her big tent proclamations that she gave me years ago. So we know Dean Phillips is now being considered among the Democratic Party elite, but there are also desperate Republican donors looking for an escape hatch to Donald Trump, who just yesterday was charged with additional indictments over the classified documents. And we are fully expecting him to be charged over January 6th and his role in the Georgia attempted election fraud. Now, let's take a look at where Republican donors in very, very ritzy, comfortable events, who are they looking at? Neither were the concerns expressed by the Republican elite at a pair of summer getaways this month, I'm told. At the Bohemian Grove, the secretive conclave of men who gather in Northern California, the attendance was a who's who of pre-Trump Republicans, a murderer's row of bundlers and Wall Street Journal editorial page favorites, including former House Speaker Paul Ryan and ex-Florida Governor Jeb Bush, as my colleague Ryan Lizza reported. With fear setting in about Trump's renomination, the gathering became something of a fantasy camp on how to avert that prospect, or at least confront it. One name that came up as a potential apolitical independent nominee was retired Admiral William McRaven, the former Special Operations Commander who became Chancellor at the University of Texas. Well, if you want to know anything about William McRaven, he was the general or commander that oversaw the execution and assassination of Osama bin Laden. So that would probably win over Republican voters, even some Democratic voters. And since retiring, he's taken the time-tested path of serving on boards of corporate criminals. 2018, he joined the board of ConocoPhillips. If you need to know anything about ConocoPhillips, they're one of the most corrupt fossil fuel companies. Here's just one example. State and ConocoPhillips reached $3.7 million settlement in double dipping lawsuit. They were also one of the one of the main investors in the Dakota Access Pipeline that went through the indigenous reservation at Standing Rock. In 2022, McRaven joined the board of Palantir. If you don't know about Palantir, it is Peter Thiel's company that is helping the NSA spy on the entire world. So that's William McRaven on the board of ConocoPhillips and Palantir. But it's not just William McRaven that desperate Republicans are eyeing as a potential escape hatch to Donald Trump. Over in the Rockies, a few days later, was the annual Aspen retreat for donors to the Republican Governors Association. There was similar "how do we stop him" chatter there, I'm told, along with much fretting about Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' ailing candidacy. Two contenders showed up to work the donors and governors, South Carolina Senator Tim Scott and former Vice President Mike Pence. But a candidate in waiting also received ample attention. Contributors buttonholed Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin. An attendee told me, with some asking if he'd run and others skipping pleasantries and pushing him to get in the race. Glenn Youngkin, the sweater vest nerd who beat corrupt Clinton BFF Terry McAuliffe to win Virginia governor, in 2021, which the political world blamed on progressives instead of Terry McAuliffe not actually running a campaign. But Glenn Youngkin, dime a dozen Republican governor, seems to have the optics of a normal family man, wealthy out of his ass. He made a ton of money from the Carlyle Group, another corrupt private equity firm. But if you know about Glenn Youngkin, he would be a much nicer, softer, less chaotic version of Donald Trump. He would also take a wrecking ball to the climate if you look at his record, which we don't really need during a now global boiling, as they're calling it, climate inferno. Glenn Youngkin appoints Wheeler to head new Office of Regulatory Management. New executive order calls for a 25% reduction in Virginia regulatory requirements. Governor Glenn Youngkin has tapped Andrew Wheeler, the chief of the EPA under former President Trump, to lead a new Office of Regulatory Management that aims to reduce Virginia's regulatory requirements by 25%. Appointment was announced in a Thursday executive order mandating the creation of the new office, which the governor said will create much needed transparency and efficiency in Virginia's regulatory process. Wheeler's been a lightning rod for controversy in Virginia since Youngkin announced his intention to nominate him for Virginia's Secretary of Natural and Historic Resources, the state's highest environmental post. A former coal lobbyist, Wheeler was an outspoken proponent of deregulation during his tenure at the EPA. That's all we need as the Arctic is melting and the Atlantic Ocean has triple-digit temperatures and Italy's cable wires are melting underneath the ground, thus neutering air conditioning, leaving Italy's largely elderly population to nearly die without air conditioning during 100-plus temperatures. I could give more examples, but this is who we need, a czar of deregulation and the coal industry. Well, that's who Glenn Youngkin appointed in Virginia. He also pulled out of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which in Virginia and other states, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative is a cooperative, market-based, that don't love market-based effort among Connecticut, Delaware, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Vermont, and Virginia to cap and reduce CO2 emissions. So appoint a coal executive to run and deregulate the hell out of Virginia, pull out of the multi-state coalition to actually curb carbon emissions. Sounds great during a climate inferno. And then there's just kind of your dime a dozen corruption. This is from NBC News. An unusual deal gave Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin $8.5 million in cash and tax-free status to his almost $200 million in stock, lawsuit says. a shareholder of the Carlyle Group, a private equity firm formerly led by Youngkin, alleges that a 2020 deal enriched executives at the expense of cops and firefighters. Of course, this kind of corruption is an advertisement, is a plus to try and get Glenn Youngkin in there and edge out Trump, which, hey, at this point, as I've been saying, you got, forget the Stormy Daniels case. You got the classified documents case against Trump that looks ironclad. It really is black and white. I believe he would be convicted. And I believe of all the cases against him, this one serves the greatest chance of Trump entering a plea deal, which would include having to drop out of the presidential race. Then you have, it seems he's going to be indicted over January 6th and the looming indictment in Georgia. All of these cases, is a world where Donald Trump has to drop out to avoid prison time and just blame it on the deep state for ruining and taking down his movement. I believe the Republican parties would love to bring in Glenn Youngkin, holding him up as a shiny tour of winning a purple swing state, Virginia, in 2021. If you look at the desperate Democratic and Republican Party donors, one thing is for sure. They might want to get rid of two of the most unpopular candidates in Trump and Biden, but they want to replace them with equally corrupt, more palatable versions that would literally do the same exact thing, if not worse, when it comes to screwing the working class and all of us.